Hi, I'm Michael, and behind the camera is Ellie. We are the Bill Paying Hobbyists, and we're using our hobbies and skill sets to pay down debt and to save up for a down payment on a house. In this video, we're showing you how to turn a pen for profit. And after the 4th of July, we're feeling a little patriotic. Stick around, and we'll show you the critical step on how to make this pen blank show its true colors. Let's get to it. We're going to do something a little different and patriotic. We went with red, white, and blue. This is our Spectraply blank. The blank is the part of the body of the pen that you're going to be holding, and this is an acrylic blue. That's what our pen body is going to be made out of. And then we're going to use a Nexus 2-part pen kit. It's a twist pen. It's similar to a slimline. This one's just a little bit different because it has a fatter body in the center. Let's go over the parts. Now let's take the kit out and I'll show you what parts we have. This is our ink cartridge. Everything's in its own separate little bag except for the tubes. They're both exactly the same length, so they're interchangeable. That'll be basically the length of your pen. This pen kit does not take a spring. It has a transmission that will help the cartridge rotate in and out. This will screw in here like that, and then when you rotate your pen, it goes in and out, in and out. This is the beauty ring. This goes right in the center. This is a black chrome kit. This is your tip, goes here, and this is your end cap and your clip, which will go here. So we're going to take the red, white, and blue Spectraply blank and put it there, and then the blue acrylic blank will go on the top, and that's an idea of what your pen's going to look like. So the first thing we need to do is cut these down to the correct size for our tube, and we're going to go over to the bandsaw and get these cut up. Let's go. All right, we're at the bandsaw. We're going to cut these down to the right length for our tube. There are several ways you can cut your tubes to the correct length. You could just put this here and mark it with a pencil. Just give yourself extra room. You want extra room in case the blank blows out when you're drilling it, and you also need to take the time to square it off, and that's a process we do later, and I'll show you how to do that. I like to use this jig. My dad made it, and it's one of the reasons I like to use it. Basically, my tube goes here. My gauge goes right here up against the tube, and then I put my blank right up against the gauge, and then I cut. I'm going to do the acrylic one first. Doesn't really matter. This is my little turning knob. There's another video where I show you how to use this. This is just it gives me an extra little bit of length to my tube. Let's get it cut. Safety glasses on. The same length, and I have just a little bit longer than my tube. Our next step is to find the center of each of these blanks, and then we'll drill our holes. So there are many different ways you can find this. I mean, you could spend the time measuring to try to find the center of your blanks. We do it the easy way. Just take a straight edge, make an X, corner to corner, center to center. That is my center. Same thing here. X marks the spot. One other thing I like to do is I like to make an indent right in the center at the X, because that gives something for my drill bit to follow. So I just grab my awl and my 1950s hammer. And the reason I say that is because my grandfather gave me this hammer. I really don't know how old it is, but I use it because my grandfather gave it to me. So I find the center and just a little tap. Doesn't take much. That's all I need right there. There's my center. Do not hit your acrylic blanks very hard or you will crack them and not be happy. Alright, so we're at the drill press. These tubes, as I said before, are exactly the same size, and this particular kit calls for a 7mm drill bit. This nice long brad point. And you want to make sure it goes all the way down and at least goes past your backer plate, and it does. You want to make sure it's straight. Turn straight. And a lot of times I use the homemade jig. Homemade clamp. This time I'm going to use the one that Ellie bought me for my birthday. So I'm going to take this, put it all the way down to the bottom, and we're going to clamp it down. Bam! This comes with its own backer plate, and again I have a video out there that shows you how to use this. Safety glasses. And there's my hole. All the way down through the center. And we'll do the acrylic. With your acrylics, make sure you go slow. You don't want them to get hot, because then they start getting nice and soft, and then they are no good. Here we go. This is why I come all the way out every time I'm drilling with an acrylic, because when I see the wood, I know I'm all the way through my blank. All the way through. So our blanks are drilled, and now we need to epoxy our tubes into our blanks. I like to use JB Weld 5-minute epoxy. It works well for me. I let it sit overnight. I know that some people use CA glue. CA glue is a super glue. I use my CA glue only for my finish. I do not use it to glue my tubes in. I also make rings. I don't use it to glue anything into the core or onto the core using CA glue as well. I use epoxy. The CA glue tends to blow out. It's not meant for that, in my opinion. You use what's best for you, but I would recommend using some kind of epoxy that you like to use. Again, it's a 5-minute epoxy. I mix it for 30 seconds. It has a 5-minute working time, and I let it cure overnight. Before I can do that though, these tubes are smooth. I need to rough them up. The epoxy will not adhere to them very well if I don't rough them up, so I just take some 120 grit sandpaper and make it rough, kind of like if you've ever done any copper pipe welding, you rough it up before you solder it together. Also, with acrylics, you can see that tube. When you turn it and get closer to the center, you're going to be able to see the brass color. I'm going to paint my tube. After I sand it, I'm going to paint my tube with some blue acrylic paint. Let it dry for an hour, and then the epoxy that I used to glue it in here will hold everything together, and believe it or not, it still stays very strong. So let's sand these up. We're going to paint one tube, and then we'll get to gluing. I do it that way, and then I go this way. This is the paint I'm going to use. It's just Magic Fly acrylic paint, Midnight Blue. So I'm just gonna take this stick, it's kind of like a skewer, and some painter's tape. Just wrap it around the end a little bit, not a lot. Just enough that this sits on here nice and snug. There we go. And now I can paint it. It doesn't need to be super thick, because if it's too thick, it's not gonna fit inside your blank, and then you're just gonna scrape it off anyway. Put it right there, and we let that dry for an hour. Over here inside, I got my cardboard, my stirring stick, my 2-part epoxy, both of our tubes and both of our blanks. Now remember, the blue one is going to go into the blue acrylic, and the one that's not painted is going to go in here. So I take my 2-part epoxy and use part A and part B, equal parts. Just put some on the cardboard, nice little bead, match the bead with part B. And then I'm going to mix it up for about 30 seconds. Make sure when you're using your epoxy, whatever brand you use, you follow the directions. Now when I put this on, I want to get a nice even coat on here. You need to have good coverage of this. Don't be stingy with it. You don't want it coming out. You don't want the wood separating or your acrylic separating from your tube when you're turning it. Slide this in here, back and forth motion, and twist at the same time. And then push that in all the way so it doesn't stick out on this end. Make sure it's not sticking out on your other end. That's good. Set that off to the side. And let's do this one. It's good to go. And now we let it sit overnight. The blank's dried overnight, so now we need to clean out any of the excess epoxy that's inside the tube, and then we'll go to the lathe and we start turning. So let me show you how we clean them out. So as you can see, there's just a little bit of epoxy that's on the inside of the tube, and we need to get that cleaned out. This side's pretty good. It's really simple. Just take an X-Acto knife, start cutting at it, and you'll get it out. See how it's coming out? And that's all we need to do. We just need to get it cleaned out. Boom. Check this side just to make sure. That's it. Time to go to the lathe. Okay, this is my Jet 12 by 21 inch lathe. What that means is I can cut something that has a 12-inch diameter, like a bowl or a plate. It will cut up to 21 inches long. If I wanted to maybe make a pool cue or do spindles for a stairwell or chairs or something like that. This piece here on the tailstock, this piece right here is called a mandrel saver, and it spins on its own because this does not turn by a machine or by belt or by any kind of other mechanism. And what that does is it slides on the end of my shaft for my mandrel. This pin mandrel fits inside here. The headstock, this part is the drive. It has the motor on it, and it has about a 1/4 inch, 7mm 1/4 inch shaft. These are my sacrificial bushings. We like to use that word now. These are for later. We don't need those right now. So I'm gonna put them away in their little case. And I have my plastic case here, something my dad turned me on to. This comes from Harbor Freight. This little case right here comes with these, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 24 little bitty boxes inside. And that's where I put all my bushings. These are my Nexus bushings. Get this out of the way. I use an old bushing here as a spacer on the end. The Nexus bushings are a little different than a slimline. They're not all the same. There's 3 different sizes. This is for my end cap, this is for the center, and this is for my tip. So I got to remember how my pen goes together and how I'm putting those on there. So I'm going to use the tip one, the smallest one first. We're putting this as the main body of the pen. This is the part you're going to write on, so my tip's going to go there. And then I'm going to have my beauty ring, the biggest one that goes in. So I'm going tip to beauty ring, and then this is going to be the top part. So beauty ring, and then the medium one on the end goes to end cap. And then I'm going to use another spacer. So I can turn these both at the same size so they're generally following the same pattern on the pen. I slide my tailstock over, I get it just touching. I lock down my lever. This is my fine tune adjustment. I'm going to give it a little bit of a turn. I don't want to get too tight and then lock it down. If you tighten this too much, you're gonna cause your shaft on your pen mandrel to bow and everything's gonna wobble and it's not gonna be perfectly round. This is my tool rest. My chisel is gonna rest right on this tool rest. I get it as close as I want. Some people like to be right up on it. I like to be about right here. Lock it down. I wanna make this parallel to the piece you're cutting on. As far as the height, up and down you wanna go, this has a little clamp ring on it that puts it exactly where I want it based on my chisel. You want your tool to rest so that the blade falls as close to the center of what you're cutting as possible. And when you're cutting, use your finger, hold it down, and slide back and forth. This gives you nice even motion. This is the control board for my lathe, on off with a safety switch. It will not work without that in there. This is forward and reverse. You want to turn forward. This is my control knob for my speed. It'll go all the way up to roughly 3,600 RPM, 3,650 revolutions per minute. You don't want to turn that fast, not for this. I usually cut around 2,800. That's good right there. So that's what I'm gonna cut at. If you're getting value out of this, make sure you subscribe so you can see more. Thank you. As for how you're gonna hold your chisel and your motions and everything else, you don't wanna be way out here and doing this because there's no rigidity to your body. Bring it in tight. Bring your arms in, get comfortable, and get close and rock. That's one fluid motion, and your arm stays in one spot. You're not moving your hands in and out. So let's go to cutting. Slow, easy cuts, take your time. What I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna get this one round. I'm gonna get my Spectraply round first, and then I'm gonna do my acrylic. Touch right there. You can tell if it's round or not. It's not completely round. Let me show you. I have a little bit of a flat spot. So those two spots right there and right there. So I'm not completely round yet. That's gonna be a pretty pen. Don't get in a hurry and try to start cutting before your lathe is up to speed. It can cause you to gouge. All right, now that's round. And let's cut our acrylic. Acrylic, take your time. Do not get in a hurry. Do not get it hot. If you get it too hot, it becomes mushy and it's not usable. What's really cool is if you can tell, if you're looking at this, this looks flat. So you can tell that it's not completely round yet. This face here, it should look like it's flat. If you're looking straight on, it looks like it's flat even though it's turning. And then up here, it should look like you can see through the corner of it. So I know my piece isn't round yet. And as I cut, I can see that flat area getting smaller and smaller. Another way you can tell with acrylic is I have all these little pieces. You'll see what happens when I get it round. See how the pieces are getting longer? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get them a little bit closer to my bushings and then I'm going to square them off. The goal is to make sure that the ends of the blanks are the exact length of the tube and that they're completely square and perpendicular to the inside of the tube. Let's get to that. Get this stuff out of our way. Take off my mandrel, pen mandrel. Drill chuck goes in here. This is a punch pen. Make sure it's the right size. Doesn't wobble, fits pretty good with the tube that you're using. Goes in here. I like to bring it all the way back to here to rest on the chuck. Tighten that down. Just a little sanding pad. Screws on to my headstock. This is like 80 grit sandpaper. And what this does, instead of just putting it in the drill chuck, this helps it keep it off center so I'm getting more of my sanding pad. You see the tube and you can see the blank where it's not all the way down to it. The goal here is to make the blank go down to the edge of the tube. We don't want to sand too much, so you're going to take your time doing this, because if you go too much, you're going to sand your tube and then it gets shorter and shorter, and then it's not long enough to accommodate the ink cartridge. What I'm looking for is when I sand this down, I'm going to just hit the tube just a little bit, and it's going to become very, very shiny, like polished brass. And that's what I'm looking for, is that shiny, shiny. I'm going to turn my lathe down to about 1600 RPM. I don't want to sand at 28. That's too fast. And I'm going to do both ends. I bring it in close, I lock this down, I make sure this is locked, and then I just slide my tube over. And just like everything else, when you're cutting, sanding, whenever you're doing this, take your time. Don't get in a hurry. Now it's shiny. Let's get this side. This is not going to take very much for this side. And then we can do the same thing for this one. both the same length, and now this face is perpendicular to the tube. And what that's going to help me do is when I go to put these together, I'm not going to have these big gaps between my pen parts on the kit. So let's break all this back down and we get down to the final stages of cutting. For this cut, I'm going to take them very, very close to the bushings, but I'm not going to cut to the bushings. As you can see, those little lines in there, I have sand marks in there, and I don't want to do that anymore. If I keep sanding on these bushings, what's going to happen is those little metal shavings are going to go into my wood. It's going to turn it silver or gray on the end. Also, what it does is it's going to cause my bushings to get smaller and smaller, so they're not going to be true to size for the kit. Very close, and then we're going to swap them out for those sacrificial bushings that I showed you earlier. Back to about 2800, and here we go. Let me start tapering this end in. This is the tip. .94. Perfect. All right, I have them close to my bushings, so now I'm going to swap them out because I do not want to sand those. It's going to be upside down for you, but this is my tip bushing, so I need to get this tip close to 8.49 millimeters. Here is our special trick for Spectraply. If I sand right now, all these colors from these different layers are going to start bleeding into each other. So what I need to do first is put a very light coat of CA glue onto it. What it's going to do is it's going to pull all those colors together and keep them where they are. I'm going to do it at a slow speed, probably about 600-700. I'm going to do a fast white. Now, if you remember, I told you should keep those little baggies. This is why. Hobbytown makes their own brand of CA glue. This is Instacure, and it is super fine. Take one of the little baggies. This is what the baggie's really good for. Stick it on the end of your finger, and then you take your glue, Lathes down to about 600, and nice and fast. Then a little bit of accelerator. And it's going to lock all those colors into where they're supposed to be. That's ugly. Now we're going to sand it down the way it's supposed to be. But now, because CA glue is so thin, it goes down into the wood and seeps down into it, and it's going to help keep those fibers there. If you don't do that when you start sanding, the blue and the red are all going to be meshed together, and it's going to look really bad. Time to sand. We'll put this up to about 1400. 180 grit sandpaper and just a piece of 1/4 inch plywood. Fold it over. This gives me a flat surface so that my blank is actually more symmetrical. I want to get down to the wood. Right now I'm just sanding CA glue. And you can tell when you start getting into the wood because that white's going to go away. Not putting a lot of pressure. Now I want to do my ends. 8.81. Almost there. A little bit more. I'm not going to go all the way to what I need it because I still have more sanding to do. This is our first rough sanding. 8.64, that's pretty close. All right, now let's check our beauty ring dimension off of this bushing, which is 10.94. Let's see what we got to get to on this end. We're at 11.6. We got a little ways to go. There we go. That's perfect. Now, before we go any further, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check it with the actual bushings. Nice. Very nice. All right, let's finish cleaning this one up. So I sanded with the 180. Now I have all these lines in here. I want to get rid of those lines. You don't want that there because it's going to show through your finish. It doesn't take a lot with this particular type of wood, so don't go crazy. Spectraply is basically just sections of small, thin, 1/8 inch pieces of wood that are dyed different colors and then glued together, exactly like plywood. All right, now you see all those lines? I gotta get rid of those lines. Let's get rid of those lines. Be careful when you use a rag on a lathe. Keep the excess out of the way. If it gets caught in that lathe and your pen mandrel, it's going to rip your finger off. Now I'm going to sand with 320. Same process. Remember, I'm close now. I don't want to take too much off. Get rid of the lines. From 320, I'm using a foam pad. This is about 500. Not doing a lot. This is about 1500. Many people do their pens different ways. This is how I do mine. There we go. Now, a very important part to do. All right, a very important part is we want to get rid of all the dust and particles we can. So, important part now is we need to clean, shop rag, and alcohol. It says alcohol, however, that is denatured alcohol. It cleans a lot better and it doesn't leave any residue. We'll turn this back up to about 1300. Clean it really good. And we're gonna get that, and that's okay. We didn't ruin anything. We want to get all the dust out of that as much as possible. Now that it's clean, it's time to put the actual final coat of CA. I put the cardboard down to protect my lathe. I don't want CA all over my lathe. And I use Mercury Flex Thin and Medium. I'm going to use the thin first. This is just a shop rag. I rolled it up, flattened it out, cut it into sections. I'm going to do this very, very fast in the first coat. Put some on there. Boom. A little bit of accelerator. Looking for white spots. We currently have none. It's nice and bright. You see how those colors are bright now? Wait till I get the rest of the shininess on there. And by shininess, I mean this. It's another coat of thin. Now it's time for medium. I'm spraying accelerator on there. It's the stuff that comes with your glue, Mercury Adhesive Accelerator. It just makes the glue dry really, really fast. Instead of taking a minute or so, it takes about 10 seconds. Another coat of medium. Nice protective coat. There we go. Alright, I'm going to let this dry for a little bit and we're going to work on the acrylic blank. Now the acrylic blank is going to be done a little bit differently in that we don't need to use any glue on this one. We just need to sand it down to the correct size and polish it up. So for this one we need 8.86 millimeters and we currently have 9.88. So we go back to our 180 again, get this back up to about 1400. And sand. Now you see those white lines in the dark? You got white, dark. That means this is actually higher than this part. We want to make it all even, and that's why I use the backer board. Once it's all white or all dark, then I know that it's pretty much flat and there's not a lot of ridges in the blank. Don't put a lot of pressure and don't sand for a long time either. Again, you don't want to get your acrylic too hot. Now the ends, you can see how they're still dark and that's fine because it's of course tapered away. It's from here to here that I want to make as flat as possible. Alright, so that's done. Now I want to concentrate on my end here that I need to get down to 8.86. Remember to always sand the length of your blank before moving to the next grit. You want to get rid of the lines going around the blank. Then the same process with 320 grit, 500 grit foam pad, and 1500 grit. Now it's time to wet sand. This is micro mesh. It goes from 400 grit to 12,000 grit. Use light pressure and go through all 9 pads. When you see water start to fly off the blank, then you are finished with that grit. Time for my honey bear. This is glass polish. 2 coats with a microfiber cloth. Wax on, wax off. Last is Renaissance wax. Not a lot, a very little bit. What a beautiful color. Now it's time to polish the Spectraply. First, we will sand very lightly with Abernet. 180 to 400 grit. We want to smooth out the rough lines from applying the CA glue without removing all of the CA, just enough to get rid of all the shine. Now I put a little CA on each end so when I wet sand, the water does not seep into the wood. Wet sand the same as the acrylic. Look for that water. Glass polish and Renaissance wax. Done. That is beautiful. Look at those colors. We are ready to assemble. Before we do, I need to sand the ends of my Spectraply to make sure it is flat after all the CA glue. Use a chamfer tool to bevel the inside of your tubes. It helps during assembly. First, we press the tip into the Spectraply, the small end, not the bigger end. Don't press too hard, you could crack your finish. Next, we press the transmission. This line tells you how far to press it into your tube. This part is done. See that discoloration? Even after all that twisting, the epoxy did not evenly distribute, causing air pockets. This is just something that can happen, and there really is no fix for it. It's another blue one, and it accompanies the Spectraply quite well. It actually has a nice blue spot here. We line up the clip to make sure it doesn't hide the section we want to show and press. We slide the top on with the areas we want to line up, and there, red, white, and blue is done.
Hey buddy, it's time for numbers.
Yeah, it's numbers time. Now, if you take into account our tools and using the shop, we're looking at $0. When you put in the materials and supplies that we use, like our pen kit, the blank, and any of the other supplies that we use, we're looking at about $25. We're gonna list this pen for $45. That'll give us a $20 profit to put towards our financial goals. Thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying this, please subscribe, and we'll see you next Thursday.